Hey, what's up? It's Jared with Ditch Auto, and today we're here with the GoPro Hero 5, and we are talking about the top 5 photo settings that I change on this camera. Now, I previously did a video on the top 5 settings. I normally use my GoPro more for video and for time-lapse than I do for just creating still photos. So my previous video, which I'll link to in the description, and I'll also put a link at the end of this video, is the top 5 video settings that I change on my GoPro Hero 5. And I thought it just would be best to do a separate video for photos, because when you want to take photos with the camera, you want to make sure that your settings are what they should be. And photo settings are different than video settings. So let's just go and take a look at how I set the camera up really quick, and then we'll jump into those settings. Obviously, we will need to switch into photo mode. So now we're in photo mode. 12 megapixels, default size. We can also kind of scroll through over and see some of the other settings that are available. But we got our 12 megapixel, we've got our field of view. I typically always set my field of view to wide, because I found when you start to kind of zoom in on some of these other modes like medium or narrow, your image just isn't as sharp from edge to edge. I don't know this for sure, but I do believe that the sensor and lens and everything that was created for this camera is created to shoot in wide, and any of these other settings are software controlled, and that's just what makes sense to me, because the image just doesn't seem to be as great when you switch into those modes. So I tend to leave my camera in wide, and that is basically what we're looking at. So the first thing that I go in and change, I swipe over from the side, and I enable Protune. You enable Protune by hitting that little power icon down there, and it enables Protune. When Protune is not enabled, your camera is basically in full auto mode, and your camera is making all the decisions for you, and you're not actually able to control a lot of what the camera does when it's capturing a photo. So I enable that, put it in Protune mode. Now, Protune mode, just enabling it is gonna produce you a better photo just by turning that on. So that's the first step, I think, is just to turn on Protune. That's what I do. The second thing that I go in and change is the settings that Protune has enabled. Now, most of the time when I take a picture, I am going to edit it somehow. I'm going to take the photo either from the GoPro camera straight to my phone, or I'm going to take it from the GoPro SD card and straight to my computer, and I will edit it somehow. Never am I uploading a photo directly from the camera without doing some sort of editing on a phone app or a computer app. So definitely what I do is I turn off GoPro Color and I put it on flat. The reason that I put it on flat is because I don't want GoPro to go and make that image all contrasty. Basically, that's what it's doing. It's adding contrast to your image, and when it does that, it's taking away your ability to do that on your own. It's crushing some of the areas of the image, the highlights and the shadows, and making them more contrasty, which could take some data away from the photo that you could emphasize using some sort of an app that is dedicated to editing. You can add contrast, you can make your GoPro Color very easily just by taking the image out of the GoPro to your phone and using an app like Snapseed and adding a little bit of contrast in, but then you're going to have other features as well, like bumping your shadows up a little bit so you have a little bit of detail in those dark areas, or bringing down some of the highlights because maybe there's some areas of your image that kind of came out a little overexposed. If you let your camera do GoPro Color and then you go to edit that photo, you're going to have less of a range to work with in that application. Same goes for sharpness. I set the sharpness down to low because I want to be able to adjust that in an app. I don't want the camera doing that on the fly. I will admit GoPro does a pretty decent job when you are outside and the lighting situation is great. It's a nice sunny day and you take a photo with your GoPro, letting it do GoPro Color, letting it sharpen it the way that it wants to, does produce a pretty nice image. But I found that if you want the control, you take that away from the GoPro and you get a nice flat image out of the GoPro, which has more dynamic range to play with. Otherwise, if GoPro didn't think people like me wanted to do that stuff, they would just GoPro Color for everybody. So flat color, low sharpness. So the next thing I do is decrease the ISO maximum from 1600 to 800. Now the reason that I do this is because the GoPro camera, when it captures an image in a lower light situation and it bumps that ISO up, 1600 is going to get you a grainy image. Now 1600 is going to help you see better in the dark, but it's also going to give you a grainy image. And I would rather have an image that is clear and underexposed than have a properly exposed image that is grainy. It's much easier to increase the exposure of a nice clean image than it is to remove a bunch of grain from an image, a bunch of sensor noise from an image. You can do that in software, but it makes everything smooth and just kind of not feel real, almost porcelain when you get carried away with noise reduction. And if you have to do that, it's best, just to shoot in a way that you're not going to have to remove sensor noise. And the way to do that is to set your ISO max lower. You can also set your ISO minimum to something lower as well, like ISO 100. When you're out on a super bright day, you don't need ISO to be set at a minimum of 400 because 400 is quite high for a bright day. If your ISO minimum is set to 400, that means that your shutter speed is going to have to try and go higher, or your different camera settings. The camera's going to have to work harder to try and darken that image, and there just isn't enough range to do that. On a DSLR camera, I may go down to ISO 100 on a bright day so that I can bring my shutter speed back down to something reasonable, and have a little bit of motion blur in the background while still having my subject sharp. If you have your ISO set to too high of a number on the minimum, then you're going to have issues with that. So we have WDR, which improves the level of detail in the image's dark and bright areas. So this is good for backlit scenes, it says. Now, I typically leave this turned off, and this isn't a feature that, because I leave it turned off, and by default it's off. But in a situation where you're taking a picture of a person and it's super bright behind them, typically the person is underexposed, they look dark, because the GoPro sees all that crazy brightness going on behind them, and it thinks, I need to compensate for all of that brightness, so I'm going to darken everything. Everything in the background looks good now, but your subject looks horrible. You can't even see them. So this is a feature that you can enable for that, and it definitely helps out. It's just not something that I will reposition a person or change my angle to compensate before I will enable that option. Because when you enable that option, you know what's going to happen? It's most likely going to try and balance the background and balance the foreground, and you're going to get an image that just doesn't look the greatest all around, or it's going to look forced. It's going to look, not real. And I want my image to look as real as possible. And sometimes that means forcing myself to change the environment or move myself and the camera around until I find something that looks best. So I enable RAW format. That is the next option. Saves the photo both as a JPEG and a GPR RAW file. Now, by default in the past, the GoPro has just shot JPEGs. JPEG images are compressed images, and when GoPro added in the ability for RAW images, here in these new models, RAW images are a much more wide dynamic range of an image. There's more data there. Yes, they're bigger file sizes, but when you take that RAW image and you put it on your computer, or you put it on a smartphone app that allows for RAW image editing, you have much more data to work with. Those shadows, those dark areas, you have more data in them. Those super bright areas that may be overexposed or may need some adjustment, you have more data there. If you shoot JPEG, it's a already compressed image, it's less data to work with, and I highly recommend shooting RAW. Basically what that means is that you're going to have two files. When you take a picture, it's going to create a RAW and a JPEG file. The JPEG could be for quick sharing to social media or whatever. The RAW file is that nice raw, heavy file that you're going to go back and be able to adjust a lot more, make the sky look better, make the person look better, whatever's going on in the image, you're going to have more room to work with because you shot in RAW. So I always enable that. Of course, you can always turn it off, but make sure to turn it on. And it's hard to know whether something's on or off because it's just a basic little color change. All right, so the last thing that I make sure that I do on a brand new camera is set the date and time and format the card inside the camera. Setting the date and time is super important for photos as well as maybe even enabling the GPS settings, because if you do not set the date and time appropriately on your camera, what's going to happen is that the date and time that's written to the image file is going to be incorrect. And when the date and time that's written to the image file is incorrect and you go to upload that photo to Facebook or some form of social media, it's going to organize that photo incorrectly. So say you just upload a brand new photo that you just took to Facebook, and then somebody's going and they're scrolling your photos by date. That photo is going to appear like a month or 2 or 3 or 4 or a year old, whatever the date is on the camera. So setting the date and time correctly on your camera is going to make sure that the photos that you take get written with the correct information, and then when you go to upload them later, they're able to be kind of categorized or ordered correctly. Now, the GoPro app on your phone makes it very easy to do this. If you have the GoPro app on your phone turned on and you have your camera paired to your phone, there's an auto update date and time button. You just tap that and it automatically updates it. Or of course, you can come into the back of your camera here and manually go and make these adjustments right here just simply by scrolling through the date and setting them. All right, so the last thing, which is the last part of 5, is I format the card in the camera as opposed to formatting that card on my computer or something else. Now, I also use one card for my camera. I don't jump that card around to anything else unless it's another GoPro camera. The reason for that is that each camera, computer, smartphone all format in a specific way. And even though some of them may use the same format method, there may be some little feature or aspect that's different. So if I format a card in my phone and then put it into my GoPro, and then take a bunch of photos and video, there may be issues with saving and the way that it writes files, and it may conflict with the way that the card was formatted, and it may break my files. Doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen. Also, if you use a card in multiple devices, so maybe you're using it in your phone, you're using it on your GoPro, you're using it in some other sort of camera or media player, all of those have different ways of writing files, and they also create additional folders on the card. What happens there is that if you're in your camera, so I'm just going to go ahead and get back to our main menu here. You swipe over from the side. We see from this side, we see all of the information that's on our card that the GoPro has captured. So these are photos and videos, time lapses that we've captured in the GoPro. It's not showing me what is from another camera in another folder or from another device like my smartphone. So I might have documents and media, music, whatever on that card that is not going to show up in the GoPro, and so I won't even know that it's there unless I remember that it's there. So it's best just to get an SD card that's specific for your camera and format it in the card. So just to recap, that last thing that I do, settings that I change the date and time, make sure that that's correct. If I go between different time zones, I make sure that I update it. And then I make sure that I format the card. And that's not just a first 5 thing that I do. It's what I do every time I go out and shoot new. Of course, after I've backed up my card, I make sure that my card's backed up. But I format the card inside the camera to assure that the format was taken place with the camera and the way the camera does it, because that's the way that the camera was designed. I don't allow other devices to format my cards. So that's going to do it for this video. As for SD cards, I also put a couple of recommendations on SD cards down in the description of this video, as well as a link to where you could pick one of these up. Maybe you haven't got one yet, you're thinking about getting a second one, make sure to check out that link. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to our channel and click on the thumbs up for this video to let us know you liked it. And then of course, there is also the top 5 settings for video. Make sure to check out that video and other videos that we have here on Ditch Auto. This channel is all about making sure you're getting the best use out of your cameras, that you're taking control of your camera, that you are not letting it do its auto thing. You are using the settings that are given to us to get the best image possible out of our camera. That is the Ditch Auto way. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time here on Ditch Auto.